Johnson & Johnson has built a healthcare empire. It includes prescription and over-the-counter drugs, orthopedic implants, surgical products, and household products. The most popular consumer brands include Band-Aids, Tylenol, and Johnson's baby powder. Still, the bulk of Johnson & Johnson's revenue comes from prescription drugs and medical devices. However, Johnson & Johnson has been at the center of scandals and government investigations over the years, and the healthcare giant has faced its share of lawsuits. After recalls for some of its drugs and devices, and consumers harmed by J&J products suing the company, a Huffington Post investigation named Johnson & Johnson America's most admired lawbreaker. Stick with me and let's explore this law-breaking empire further. In this video, we're going to show you 10 facts that you need to know about Johnson & Johnson. We're OnlyBrands, the channel dedicated to bringing you awesome, regular content on the world's hottest brands. Let's do this. Talc scandal. Johnson & Johnson announced in October of 2021 its talc subsidiary filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company had previously set aside nearly $4 billion to cover lawsuits claiming its iconic Johnson's baby powder causes cancer, including ovarian cancer and mesothelioma. To date, billions of dollars have been awarded to the plaintiffs. The U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation in July of 2019 to determine if Johnson & Johnson purposefully misled the public about asbestos fibers in its talcum powder. The Justice Department criminal investigation may take years to resolve. In 2018, a Reuters investigative report exposed the company knowledge of asbestos contamination in its talc products tracking back decades. Tests from different labs found asbestos in Johnson & Johnson's talc from 1971 to the early 2000s, and the company failed to report the findings to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Tylenol crisis. In the world of medicine, recalls are an unfortunate but expected occurrence. However, Johnson & Johnson had to carry out one of the most famous recalls of all time during the early 1980s. Before the crisis, Tylenol was the most successful over-the-counter product in the United States with over 100 million users. However, during the fall of 1982, for reasons not yet known, a malevolent person or persons presumably unknown replaced Tylenol extra-strength capsules with cyanide-laced capsules, resealed the packages, and deposited them on the shelves of at least half a dozen or so pharmacies and food stores in the Chicago area. The poison capsules were purchased, and 7 unsuspecting people died a horrible death. Johnson & Johnson, parent company of McNeil Consumer Products Company, which makes Tylenol, suddenly and with no warning had to explain to the world why its trusted product was suddenly killing people. However, Johnson & Johnson ended up receiving praise for how they handled the situation. They were honest, effective, and efficient during the recall process. They also worked closely with the FDA, the FBI, and the Chicago police to try to identify who had perpetrated the crime. Johnson & Johnson were also careful to note that the tampering had happened at the retail level, not at their facilities. Nevertheless, Tylenol soon bounced back and remains the most popular painkiller you can get over the counter today. By withdrawing all Tylenol, even though there was little chance of discovering more cyanide-laced tablets, Johnson & Johnson showed that they were not willing to take a risk with the public's safety, even if it cost the company millions of dollars. Pelvic disaster. In 2012, Johnson & Johnson Group reached a $300 million settlement in 2 class actions after thousands of women worldwide reported complications from pelvic mesh implant products, including chronic pain, painful sexual intercourse, and incontinence. The net-like meshes, which come in a number of forms including a sling, tape, ribbon, mesh, and hammock, aim to treat pelvic organ prolapse by giving permanent support to weakened pelvic organs and to repair damaged tissue. It marks the largest settlement in a product liability class action in Australian history and is subject to a federal court approval. Johnson & Johnson Medical and Ethicon appealed to the full court of the federal court, which dismissed the appeal in March of 2021. The full court agreed with the primary judge's finding that the marketing of the mesh devices was likely to mislead or deceive. The court rejected arguments from lawyers representing Johnson & Johnson that manufacturers are excused from liability with respect to risks or complications that should be known to doctors, or which doctors and surgeons are able to discover and warn off for themselves. The court found that while medical goods cannot all be risk-free, patients should expect those devices to carry appropriate warnings about risks, even if those risks are rare. In November of 2021, the High Court dismissed Johnson & Johnson's medical application for special leave to appeal. By the way, a lot of hard work and care goes into these videos, so if you could help us out and click the subscribe button, we would greatly appreciate it. The original founder was inspired by a speech. In the late 19th century, a physician named Sir Joseph Lister, a then renowned British surgeon, began spreading the word about sterile surgery. However, he was met with much skepticism as doctors of the time didn't believe it was necessary. It was due to this that some American surgeons, hoping to discredit him, invited him to give a speech at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibitions Medical Congress. Regardless of the event's organizers' initial motivations, Lister inspired Robert Wood Johnson, who was in the audience, to create his own company with a focus on sterile surgery. He found Johnson & Johnson only a short time afterward, making quick strides in this upcoming medical field. They eventually made some of the greatest technological advancements, all due to a man that most had little faith in, Sir Joseph Lister. The firm presented alongside Edison and Tesla at the 1893 World's Fair. 17 years after Robert Wood Johnson was inspired at the Philadelphia Convention, they had reached a height that none of them had precedented. The 1893 World's Fair saw the debut of many early inventions that inspired modern technology. The Ferris wheel, the zipper, harnessed electricity, and moving walkways were all presented for the first time at the celebration of technology. Also present were the famous inventors Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Johnson & Johnson even were recognized with a few coveted honors here, such as a Certificate of Excellence. Their sterile surgical plasters, sutures, and dressings also earned them a special diploma for innovations in healthcare. They created the first mass-produced sterile sutures, dressings, and gauze. Johnson & Johnson did quite well creating sterile surgical sutures, gauze, and dressings. However, their true claim to fame is that they were the very first to mass-produce such sterile surgical implements. This was important because before they created this process, a doctor wishing to practice sterile surgery would need to create and sterilize all of their own gauze, sutures, and dressings. This made sterile surgery a huge inconvenience, and it was thus not commonly practiced. Their innovative production methods and subsequent marketing were directly related to the advent of modern antiseptic surgery. As a result, patient survival rates drastically increased. Without this early innovation by Johnson & Johnson, it's possible that modern medicine would still be quite a few years behind the point where we are at medical science today. They made it convenient and inexpensive to practice sterile surgery, something that was unprecedented before Johnson & Johnson's entry into the medical market. James Wood Johnson won an award during World War I. During the First World War, America and Russia were allies. James Wood Johnson ended up supplying the Russian government with something that they desperately needed. However, it wasn't bandages, dressings, or something other medical product you might expect from this co-founder of Johnson & Johnson. Instead, it was horseshoes. He ended up buying an interest in the Never Slip Horseshoe Company and filling a huge order, the biggest ever fulfilled by the firm, for the Russian cavalry. For his actions, the Russian government presented him with an award for wartime industry. Johnson & Johnson still has one of the horseshoes deep within their company archives. That was an especially juicy fact, right? I think that one definitely deserves a thumbs up. Johnson & Johnson sponsored classic TV shows. In the early 1950s, the firm was among the earliest major sponsors of television. They were one of the leading firms in both advertisement space and show sponsorships, showing their devotion to spreading their message and products. It was also a well-calculated move, as their customers would associate the brand with their favorite things to watch on television. Some of the shows that Johnson & Johnson sponsored include The Adventures of Robin Hood, Gunsmoke, The Donna Reed Show, and Cheyenne. These were all quite popular, and were made all the better by the infusion of cash from Johnson & Johnson. The firm also benefited with increased customers' trust and sales. One of their original employees sent a fossil to the Smithsonian. In 1886, their employee, M.S. Denman, was one of their original 14, and also one of the 8 women on the founding team. She also had a penchant for geology and enjoyed going fossil hunting once in a while. Denman once found a fossil of a prehistoric fish and sent it to the Smithsonian, showing her keenness to share discoveries with the world. It was even mentioned in the Smithsonian's 1904 annual report. To have the drive to go out and try to discover new things was exactly the spirit that Johnson & Johnson was founded on, and Denman carried that spirit close to her own heart and soul. The Johnson family owned a two-mast schooner. The schooner Zodiac was originally built for Robert Wood Johnson II and J. Seward Johnson, the first heirs to the Johnson & Johnson fortune in 1924. The ship was intended to replicate and optimize the best features of the American schooner. It even raced in transatlantic events, but also served as a recreational vessel. It was officially retired in 1972, almost 50 years after this gorgeous two-mast schooner was originally constructed. Thanks for sticking around, and we hope you enjoyed the video. But why stop now? Click these videos for more awesome content, more awesome